Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me on the Daily Connection. It's a time when we get together in the Word so that the Word gets into us. We're looking today at John 19, and I'll tell you, as we get into the crucifixion narrative, it just gets more and more excruciating. Especially when you pause and consider, we look back in the Old Testament and we see that all of this was prophesied. That what's taking place is not the demonstration that the religious leaders have power over Jesus. It's certainly not a demonstration that Pilate has power over Jesus. It's instead demonstrating that God in Christ had a purpose for his life and his death and, of course, his resurrection. And that purpose is focused in some degree, in great degree, to the problem of man, and that's sin. And so as we read chapter 19, verses 1 through 8, I just really want you to think about not just the actions being demonstrated and the attitudes being demonstrated on the part of the people, but think about how it reflects on who we are and the desperate need we have. So pick up with me in verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers also twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and clothed him in a purple robe. And they kept coming up to him and saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were slapping his face. Pilate went outside again and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I find no grounds for charging him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the temple servants saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate responded, "Take him and crucify him yourself, since I find no grounds for charging him. We have a law," the Jews replied to him, "and according to that law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." When he heard this statement, he was more afraid than ever. All right, so here we have Pilate taking some more steps, and you have to admit, he says, "I find no ground." So he's still looking for the opportunity to release him. If you go back to the end of chapter 18, you see that he brought them an ultimatum. Hey, it's a custom for me to offer you a prisoner to set free. So in this case, do you want me to release to you Jesus, or you want me to release to you Barabbas, a murdering insurrectionist? And because the chief priest and all the temple servants will kind of go with John's terms here, had already prepared the crowd, they shouted for Barabbas, a murdering insurrectionist that I assure you they had no desire to see free and they had no desire to associate with. But yet they hated Jesus so much that their hatred would not allow them to see any possibility of innocence. It would only allow them to see the potential for his death. And so Pilate takes another step, and this one wasn't unusual, that he had him flogged. In some cases, the flogging was intended to produce a confession, that if a guy was truly guilty, because they wouldn't do this to women, but if a guy was truly guilty, then surely a flogging would produce that declaration of guilt. Another reason why they would do flogging is they called it kind of half death. And he would be beaten so severely that by the time they're done with him here, the crucifixion wouldn't take that long because he just doesn't have the ability to stand up anymore. His body has been ravaged by the blows. His skin has been ripped. Muscles have been torn. He's in a bad way. And so, but I have to feel like Pilate may have had one more idea in his mind, that surely if he could have Jesus flogged and bring that person who's now been ravaged, there's blood all over him, you can just tell he's just been, intense pain has been unleashed on him, surely then the people would feel a sense of mercy and cry out for, him to be released. And so Pilate does that. And then while he's doing that, the soldiers are mocking him. They're making fun of him. And he brings that Jesus back before the people and says, "Hey, I don't find anything to charge him with. He hasn't confessed anything. I haven't discovered anything. So you take him. You take care of him." And they say, "Nope, nope." They don't even reference the fact that they don't have the right to have anybody put to death. They just say, "We have a law, and our law demands that he die because he made himself the Son of God." And there it is. The fact that they still don't get it. They still have failed to understand that Jesus didn't make himself the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God. That everything about his life, where he was born, when he was born, how he was born, everything about his life, the miracles he performed, the message that he preached, everything about his life, even to this point, his arrest, his being found guilty, everything is a fulfillment and is an affirmation that Jesus is the Son of God. He is the Messiah that they were promised and that they so desperately needed, and they rejected him. But here's the thing, friends, that was necessary. It was all prophesied in Isaiah and some of the other prophets. In fact, I was recently going through Isaiah. I'm journaling through Isaiah, and I got to chapter 53. And of course, I know what's in chapter 53, and I'm reading through that. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that should have fallen on us was cast upon him, and by his wounds we are now healed. And I read that text, and as anger and rage wells up inside of me toward the religious leaders because they are doing this all out of a selfish, self-centered motive, I realize that their actions are just the same as mine in terms of I put Christ there. He's there because of me. He's there because I have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. He's there because I was once under the penalty for sin, and I was facing the punishment for sin, which would have been eternity of separated from God, under his wrath, and tormented in hell. And in light of that, Jesus positioned himself. He placed himself. He surrendered himself to be beaten. He surrendered himself to be crucified. He surrendered his life for my life so that I could have life. And so as Pilate is feeling the concern here, what he doesn't understand is that all this is happening by the sovereign will of God. It's not man. It may be acting out on his own rage and anger. Man may be trying to instigate all this confusion and calamity. But God prophesied it all the way back in Genesis 3, by the way. But he gave us more details in the prophets and in the Psalms. And now here in this final week, this Passion Week, he is bringing it to its fulfillment, to initiate the new covenant, and to offer now salvation by grace through faith. And that's what we have to think about when we read these verses. We can't focus on the actions of Pilate because he's a puppet. He's God's tool. We can't get angry at the action of the people, the rejection and the ridicule and the scorn, because they're simply acting in a way that will be consistent with the will of God in order to bring about his desired outcome and being able to offer salvation. Man, that really does bring these verses to a deeper level, doesn't it? Because it personalizes them. And that's what I want you to think about today. That as you're reading through these verses, you're there. You're the one crying, "Crucify." You're the one shouting in a sense of rejection and rage. That's us. We're there. And yet because of that, in spite of that, God loved us. And in spite of that, Christ loved us. And he continued in that process of being scorned and ridiculed and ravaged in his physical body until the point where he relinquished his soul in death for our salvation. And friend, if that doesn't launch you into a sense of praise and adoration and worship, I don't know what will. But maybe one of the reasons why you wouldn't feel that way is because you don't understand the salvation that's being offered by the actions of Christ here. But you can, because if you'll keep reading, you'll begin to see the gospel come out. You'll begin to be confronted in your sin. You'll be led to confess Christ as Lord, believing in your heart God raised him from the dead so that you would be saved. Romans 10. Friends, let's take these verses to heart today. Whether that's to launch you into praise and adoration, worship of who Christ is, or whether that's to lead you to confession of who he is. He is delighted in both, and we want to bring great delight to him. Well, it's the middle of the week. Maybe you need to be recharged, refreshed. We have the right opportunity for you tonight. Awana registration sign-in starts at 5:45. Awana itself kicks off at 6. Youth worship's cranking up at 6 o'clock. We'll be in the worship center. Adults doing prayer and Bible study at 6 o'clock. Our choir will be practicing. Everything will be happening at 6, and we'd love to have you join us for a time of refreshing, for renewal. Maybe you just need some encouragement. We can provide that for you too. So make plans to be with us tonight, and until we're together again, live sent.